All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the sources behind the fastest expanding empire in human history. We're talking about a force that swept out of the harsh grasslands of East Asia in the 13th century and fundamentally redrew the entire world map in just 70 years. To really put that into perspective, the Roman Empire took over 400 years to reach its absolute peak. The Mongols, they did it in a single lifetime. And just to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of what they pulled off, they conquered over 9 million square miles of land. That's basically the size of the entire continent of North America, stretching all the way from the Pacific Ocean to Central Europe. But honestly, here's the most mind-blowing part. They achieved this massive conquest using an active army of barely 100,000 men. They were systematically taking down empires that had millions of citizens and massive established standing armies.
You can really start to see how they did this when you look at the stark contrast between traditional medieval armies and the Mongols. On one side, you've got a massive, heavily armored European knight sitting on a huge warhorse that needs just mountains of grain and water every day to survive. On the other side, a lightly dressed Mongol horse archer riding a small, incredibly tough pony that survives entirely on wild steppe grass. I mean, these horses were literally digging through the snow to find food. This totally busts that popular myth that their success was just the result of a bloodthirsty, disorganized screaming horde. The screaming horde is a complete myth.
Okay, let's start things off with pillar number 1, engineered for war.
You have to realize the brutal Mongolian steppe was essentially the world's toughest military academy. With temperatures violently swinging from 40 degrees below zero in the winter to over 100 degrees in the summer, it left absolutely no room for weakness. Because of this, every single Mongol child was essentially a professional survivalist right from the start. By age 3, they were riding horses without even using their hands, controlling the animal entirely with their legs and body weight. By age 5, they're handed their first bows. That is a night and day difference compared to the frightened peasant conscripts of European or Chinese armies who, let's be honest, were often just farmers handed a spear a few weeks before a battle.
And that brings us to the Nerj. Now, the crucial thing to understand here is that this wasn't just a hunting trip to grab some food, it was a total masterclass in large-scale military training. Thousands of riders would form a giant circle stretching up to 80 miles wide, slowly closing in on wild animals over several weeks. Think about it. If one rider moved a little too fast or too slow, the animals escape. They had to communicate across miles using hand signals, flags, and shouting. It drilled perfect formation riding and long-distance communication into every single soldier, long before modern technology existed.
Which leads us perfectly into pillar number 2, weapons of the steppe.
Because alongside those incredibly sturdy horses, they possessed an absolute marvel of biological engineering. The Mongol composite bow wasn't just some carved piece of wood. It was an incredibly complex, specialized piece of tech. By combining a birchwood core, inner animal horn, and outer dried animal sinew using this highly specialized fish glue, they created a weapon that literally bent backward into a complete C-shape when it was unstrung. But once you strung it, it packed a terrifying 160-pound drawweight and could launch an arrow over 300 yards to punch right through medieval armor.
But, a great bow doesn't mean much without a great marksman, right? Utilizing a specialized thumb draw protected by a stone or metal ring, they achieved sniper-like accuracy while riding at a full, flat-out gallop. The way they did this is actually brilliant. They trained themselves to wait for the exact split second when all 4 of the horse's hooves were airborne. At that precise fraction of a second, there's absolutely no vibration traveling up from the ground. They were essentially floating in mid-air, which let them hit a moving target 300 yards away, dead center, every single time.
All right, moving on to pillar number 3, social revolution.
Here's the catch. All that incredible technology and individual skill was totally useless, while the nomadic tribes were busy fighting each other in endless bloody feuds. But in 1206, a total genius of social engineering named Temujin, who we all know as Genghis Khan, completely abolished those old tribal identities. He mixed rival tribes together into this beautifully engineered decimal system. Suddenly you weren't a Tatar or Merkid anymore, you were a soldier of the Mongol Empire, and he enforced an iron discipline. Take the Arban, for example, a unit of 10 men. If one soldier fled from battle, the other 9 were executed. You weren't just fighting for some distant king, your life literally depended on the bravery of the guy standing next to you.
And Genghis Khan paired this system with a revolutionary focus on absolute meritocracy.
He genuinely did not care about noble bloodlines. All he cared about was bravery and loyalty. There's this amazing story where, during a battle, an enemy warrior actually shot Genghis Khan's horse right in the neck. When the guy was captured, he stepped forward and honestly admitted to it, fully expecting to be killed. Instead, Genghis Khan was so impressed by his honesty that he spared his life and actually promoted him. That man became known as Jebe, and he went on to be one of the empire's absolute greatest generals. Genghis Khan transformed former enemies into one unified war machine.
Let's dive into pillar number 4, supreme logistics.
While European kings were sitting around waiting weeks or even months for outdated battlefield reports, the Mongols went ahead and solved the communication problem by building the Yam system. This was a vast network of postal stations set up along major trade routes, and they were spaced at exactly the distance a horse could travel at a full gallop before getting tired out. The riders wore these belts with jingling bells, so the station workers could hear them coming from a distance and instantly prepare a fresh rested horse. The messenger would literally just hop off, jump onto the new horse, and speed away without losing a single minute.
When you look at the raw numbers, it completely explains why their enemies thought they had magical telepathy. A standard medieval message maxed out at maybe 15 miles a day. A Mongol Yam messenger, they could easily clear up to 200 miles a day. This allowed their generals to coordinate simultaneous, highly precise attacks across entire mountain ranges. They were hitting communication speeds that Europe simply wouldn't match until the telegraph was invented in the 19th century. Just wild.
Next up, pillar number 5, psychological tactics. Because the truth is, the Mongols won a lot of battles before a single arrow was ever fired. They'd send spies ahead to map the geography, and then offer cities a brutal black and white choice. Submit immediately and be spared, or resist and be utterly erased.
On the actual battlefield, they completely weaponized deception. Their famous feigned retreat tactic is a perfect example. They would pretend to panic and flee, luring eager, untrained European or Chinese armies out of their solid defensive formations for miles. Then, once the enemy was exhausted and all stretched out, the Mongols would just turn around, surround them, and unleash hidden heavy cavalry. They loved psychological visual tricks too, like tying straw dummy soldiers to spare horses or lighting 5 campfires per soldier at night to make their army look overwhelmingly massive to enemy scouts.
And finally, our 6th pillar, peace and adaptation.
Now, you really have to wonder, how on earth did nomads living in felt tents manage to conquer massive, high-tech walled cities in China and the Middle East? They did it by checking their egos at the door and becoming the ultimate technological chameleons. When they captured a city, they didn't just blindly burn it down. They systematically sorted the population and recruited the engineers, the doctors, the scholars. They used Chinese engineers to build their siege towers. They brought in Persian engineers to build massive counterweight trebuchets that could hurl 200-pound stones to crush walls in a matter of days. They even weaponized early Chinese gunpowder for explosive rockets and would routinely just redirect entire rivers to flood heavily fortified cities. By absorbing the greatest minds they came across, they rapidly evolved into the most advanced siege army on the planet.
But obviously, you can't just conquer indefinitely without your vast new empire collapsing under constant rebellion, right? So they established the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. Genghis Khan realized that forcing religions on people just breeds resentment, so he actually declared complete freedom of religion across the empire. They also made the Silk Road incredibly safe for booming trade by using the paisa. If you held this metal passport, you were traveling under the absolute protection of the Great Khan himself, which allowed ideas, technology, and culture to flow freely between East and West.
There's this amazing quote from a medieval Persian chronicler that really drives this home, noting that someone could walk across the empire with gold on their head and be completely safe. What this shows us is that, for a lot of conquered citizens, Mongol rule actually felt like an incredibly stable golden age of prosperity and technological exchange, rather than some brutal, suffocating occupation. And that stability meant the Mongols didn't have to act as a massive occupying police force, which freed them up to just keep expanding outward.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really chew on. The Mongol expansion wasn't some historical accident, and it certainly wasn't just mindless brutality. It was a perfect storm, a total masterclass in engineered, scientific brilliance, adaptation, and ruthless efficiency. When you look at all these pieces coming together, which factor do you think truly made them unstoppable? Was it the horses, the organization, or the psychological warfare?
Please like and subscribe.